Have you ever been burned by hyped picks like Budda Baker or Minkah Fitzpatrick? This year, we're turning those tables. Discover the IDP studs you must draft to crush your 2023 fantasy football leagues. To start that off, we're going to talk about a guy who was one of the top tacklers last year, Roquan Smith from the Baltimore Ravens. Austin, why do we love him as a stud this year?
Well, Roquan Smith finished top 3 in tackles last season, and he finished with 4.5 sacks in 3 out of his 5 NFL seasons, including 5 or more passes defended. He's a super versatile player, and he's never finished a season without an interception.
And it's crazy to think about. That was going from Chicago's defense to Baltimore's defense. Definitely something that should make you go, this guy is elite. Next up, talented Cleveland edge rusher defensive end Myles Garrett. This guy has been a force to reckon with for years. Ask Mason Rudolph. What makes you think that Myles Garrett's going to continue that trend in 2023, Austin?
Well, Myles Garrett is a physical specimen for the Cleveland Browns, and I think he's going to have a monster season. You know, he's super effective off the edge. He's got great bend, great size. He does all the things right, and he's a leader in that defensive scheme. So for that defensive team. So I love what he brings to the table, and I'm excited for what he's going to do in 2023.
Absolutely. On to Derwin James from the Los Angeles Chargers. Finished out 2022 with 115 combined tackles, 4 sacks, 2 interceptions, and we've seen very similar numbers over the previous few seasons when healthy. What makes you think that this guy is going to continue to pop off in 2023?
Well, again, it's just the leadership. Derwin James is one of those guys who's a leader in the locker room. He's very vocal on the football field, very confident in his game. I think you see that in the way that he plays. He plays fast. He plays physical, one of the most physical safeties in the game. So super excited for him. And he gets turnovers as well. So he gets his numbers in a lot of ways. Super diverse, and I'm excited for what he'll do this year.
100%. And a guy that's moving closer to 100% in snap share is Nick Bolton from the Kansas City Chiefs. We saw him go from 60% to almost 100% last year. This guy is continuing to be the focal point in the middle of the defense. Chris Jones currently looks like he might not be playing to start the year. What makes you think that Nick Bolton can continue to throw himself into the top tier of IDP players this year?
Well, I think Nick Bolton probably wants to get Chris Jones back. But one thing I will say is that he was the number 2 linebacker last season, and I see more of that 100% or rough 100% snap count ahead of him this season. He finished with 180 tackles, so he was extremely productive in terms of tackles. He doesn't need a high floor of sacks. He can be effective for your IDP squads with those tackle numbers alone. So I'm excited for him this year, and I would have him in your IDP leagues.
And another guy that we are going to move on to is Jalen Pitre, second-year guy in a new scheme with a new head coach, DeMeco Ryans, in Houston, but finish out really strong last year. 147 combined tackles, 5 interceptions, got a sack. This guy was all over the field and looks to be a focal point of this young up-and-coming defense that added Will Anderson, that has Christian Harris, Henry To'oTo'o. I mean, it looks like Alabama light, but then Jalen Pitre's leading the back end. What makes you think that this guy is going to continue to ascend into the upper tier of IDP players?
Well, he finished 11th overall in tackles, to your point, with 147, and he was the only other safety that finished inside the top 25 in total tackles last season. He tied for second most interceptions with 5, so he's able to generate turnovers for his defense, and he was Fantasy Football IDP's number 1 scoring safety last season. I do expect another big season for him, probably top 5 at least.
Absolutely. This guy is elite. But a guy who also broke out last year, who's a guy that is now going to be one of the more leaders in this Indianapolis Colts defense, Zaire Franklin, linebacker. Last year finished 167 combined tackles, 3 sacks. He didn't get any interceptions, but he's had interceptions in the previous year. So maybe with this new look team, what makes you think that he is going to continue to keep that breakout and into a strong year too with this offense or this defense?
Well, I have my concerns for Shaq Leonard, and I think that last year Zaire Franklin was sort of a product of that. You saw his playing time go from, never playing more than 20% of the snaps in a season to playing 100% of the snaps for the Indianapolis Colts last year in 2022. If he continues to get that kind of snap count and usage for that defense, he's going to continue to be productive. He was solid. He wasn't the elite linebacker that everybody was looking for in fantasy leagues, but he was somebody who stepped up when he was called on, and he did become a leader. He finished with 167 tackles in the league, good for a top 5 finish. I would expect him to have another great season ahead of him this year.
and he's not a household name. So he should be a player that you can either get for cheap or draft later and it turn out really well for you. Now, on the flip side, a guy who is a household name, thanks to Hard Knocks and just being a force in the middle of that Jets defense, is Quinnen Williams, defensive tackle from the Jets. Last year, he was like tied for second in sacks with 13, tied for first with forced fumbles. This guy is a force, and they just got paid. I mean, this guy made bank this year. What makes you think that that money is not going to be a problem for Quinnen Williams in 2023 and beyond?
Well, he finished top 5 in total fantasy points for defensive linemen last season, and that was between all defensive ends and defensive tackles. So for him to be a defensive tackle and to have that kind of production and be that fantasy relevant, I think is huge. So if you play in a league that has defensive tackles, he's going to be one of the top players off the board at that position, one that you're going to want to keep an eye on, a fantasy stud for the defensive tackle position.
Another guy that is definitely going to be under the radar, but is already been a stud in Alabama, started as a freshman, has been a stalwart in Nick Saban's defense, now is going to quickly become a stalwart in the Detroit defense, Brian Branch. This guy's a rookie, so some of you guys might be going, whoa, pump the brakes. Rookie safeties and rookie DBs have opportunities to really go crazy. Look at Jalen Pitre last year. Detroit has already shown that they're willing to put Branch all over the defense. So what makes you think that Brian Branch could be an IDP stud in 2023?
It's the perfect landing spot for the Lions, for Brian Branch to join the Lions. He looks like he could be the unrealized Bijan Robinson of the safety position. I mean, he is truly one of the best players in this class from a pure football perspective and from an IDP perspective. I think that he should be a comparable prospect to that of Derwin James and Jamal Adams. I think he's that electrifying. And so I'm excited for Branch this season. His versatility is going to be utilized properly, thank goodness, by the Lions, moving him all around the defense. He's a physical guy. He can cover well, does a lot of things well. So I think he could quickly become one of the league's best safeties and somebody who I highly value in 2023.
Going from somebody who could be one of the league's best to somebody who's already one of the league's best. Foyesade Oluokun finished his career with Atlanta with 192 combined tackles, followed it up in 2022 with Jacksonville with 184 combined tackles. This guy is already the leader of that Jacksonville defense, which is very strong. I think Josh Allen, they got plenty of talented DBs. What makes you think that we're going to continue to see this trajectory for a soon-to-be 28-year-old linebacker?
Well, it's been the floor and the tackle numbers. And he was a top 2 IDP finisher in each of his last 2 seasons for standard scoring. He was the number 1 overall finisher last year in all of fantasy, put up the most points of any player, and he's consistent. So the only thing that I worry about with him is, I'm cautiously hopeful for more from him. I see him having another big year in 2023, but for dynasty leagues and beyond, I do want to kind of be careful. We're starting to toy with age with Oluokun. We'll just call him Foye. And but I think he's going to have a great 2023 season.
I absolutely 100% agree. Another guy that should have a great 2023 season is a guy who's been a stud, has had 2 double-digit sack seasons in his 4 years with the Raiders. That's Maxx Crosby. This guy is a force. I mean, you've seen it all throughout his 4 years in the league. This guy can get you sacks. This guy can get behind the line of scrimmage, can cause some forced fumbles. In those 2 years where he had double-digit sacks, he also had multiple forced fumbles, 3 and 4 respectively. Why do you think he's still a stud in 2023?
Well, I think the best ability is availability, right? We've said that before on RotoHeat. If you've watched any of our IDP content, he hasn't missed a single game in any of his last 3 seasons. And so that's excellent that he's on the field that much. He finished number 2 overall in scoring for fantasy football IDP last season. He had more than 30 quarterback hits in each of his last 2 seasons, just showing that he's getting to the quarterback effectively, even when he's not getting sacked. So he's generating good pressure. And like you mentioned, he's creating turnovers with his hands, his tackles, being able to reach in and punch out fumbles. So he is a great player, one who I'm super excited about as we head into 2023.
Going from a guy who has not missed any time to a guy who did miss a little bit of time last year, but before that was a stalwart, did not miss time over his previous 5 seasons in Pittsburgh, TJ Watt. So the 2 previous seasons prior to last year, TJ Watt had 22.5 sacks and 15 sacks. Then he had 14.5, 13, and then 7 his rookie year, but only 5.5 last year. Obviously, if he was on the field, we would have seen more. Do you have any concern with him injury-wise, or is he good to go, and is he going to continue to be a stud?
The injury is definitely concerning, although I will say that every year that he's been in the league, he's just been phenomenal. And by the way, his real name is Trent Jordan, for anyone who's wondering. So that's kind of an interesting fact about TJ Watt. Yep, fun fact. But I am optimistic that he will return to the form and be one of fantasy's top performers from an IDP perspective.
100% agree. This is a guy that you can start weekly, and he's going to get you strong production. Another guy that should, from the interior defensive tackle position, give you strong production is Miami DT Christian Wilkins. Guy's not had huge sack numbers, 3.5, 4.5. I mean, you can expect a few sacks, get you some forced fumbles, maybe a fumble recovery or two. 2 years back, he actually had a fumble recovery with a forced fumble, had 4.5 sacks. This guy's had decent production, but as a defensive stat, if you have to start defensive tackle, this is a guy that can get you solid production week in and week out. What do you love about Christian Wilkins?
Well, there's plenty of things to love, although I will say another fun fact is that last year was his first NFL season with zero offensive snaps in the league. So that's kind of interesting. First year without a snap on offense. But he's creeping up on 1,000 snaps played. Last year, he played 955 defensive snaps. He had double-digit tackles for loss. And the thing that I love the most about him is the floor that he has with tackles. 90-plus tackles in each of his last 2 seasons makes him one of the safest defensive tackle plays in all of football. And so for that reason, I'm big on Christian Wilkins. If he's the third defensive tackle off the board, I'm ecstatic.
Yeah, he's definitely weekly startable if you play a defensive tackle specific league. A guy who is weekly startable and a stud already in year 2 is Chicago's Jaquan Brisker. This guy finished with over 100 combined tackles. He got you some tackles for loss. He got you some forced fumbles, pass deflections, got you 4 sacks. Like, this guy produced really well with the Chicago team that was trying to rebuild, trying to build a new identity. What do you like about Brisker going into year 2, and why is he a stud?
Well, he's extremely versatile. You saw him break 100 tackles in his first NFL season. Talked about the tackles for loss, the sacks, hits on quarterback, making plays on the ball. He only allowed 1 touchdown in his collegiate career, and he played 962 total snaps. He also had 0 penalties in his last 2 years in the NCAA. So just a couple interesting facts about him. He's very disciplined, which is great, something that I think the Chicago Bears really needed. And he doesn't allow players to score. I mean, he's good in coverage. He's great against the run. He's a good tackler. So his game is complete. And I think that he's going to be a staple for fantasy football IDP over the next several seasons.
So like you heard at the beginning of this video, Minkah Fitzpatrick was a letdown last year. Previous year, had over 100 combined tackles, 124 combined tackles, had some pass deflections, had forced fumbles. This guy was all over the place, but then had a down year. The whole Pittsburgh team had a down year last year, right? Changing of the guard, new quarterback, trying to fix what was broken. And that just seemed like the whole team, TJ Watt hurt, all sorts of trouble. What is 2023 going to do for Minkah Fitzpatrick that's going to make him a stud again?
Well, I agree. Some of the pieces around him last season were sort of in need of help. And if he's able to get TJ Watt back on the field this season, and if they're able to get that offense going, which from what I saw in the preseason, it looks like they have things moving in the right direction, have some good players. Kenny Pickett's developing well. But for Minkah Fitzpatrick, I think that he's the leader of this defense, truly, him and TJ Watt, especially for the back end of the defense. Like you said, he's able to impact the game in a lot of ways. He was tied for the league lead last season for most interceptions. I think he had 6. So, and he's finished in the top 10 of fantasy football IDP, even though it felt like he was kind of underwhelming. He's still kind of hanging around in terms of, DB rankings at least. So he's still a top 10 defensive back in each of the last 2 seasons. I'm looking for a bounce back season from him. And I think 2023 could be a big year.
Mincah Parsons from the Dallas Cowboys. This guy has been elite since his rookie year. 13 sacks year 1, 13.5 year 2. He's getting you some fumble recoveries last year. We got forced fumbles. This guy's all over the place. Why is he going to continue to stay a stud, even with the changes that Dallas has been going through? What makes him stay at the top for you?
Well, I think all signs, including the admission from Micah Parsons himself, indicates that he's going to be moving into more of a full-time edge rusher position, which I think fits him well. Think along the lines of like Von Miller. I love the move, especially in leagues that boost sacks and tackles for loss. Though I do wonder what it's going to do for his total tackles. He's averaging 28 quarterback hits per game or per year, and 13 or more sacks in each of his last 2 seasons, like you mentioned. The tackles did have a downturn last season. They went from 84 to 65, but I'm okay with that if we see that increase in sacks that we want to see, where he's able to hit 15 or more sacks in a season, which I do think he's capable of. So I'm interested to see what Mincah Parsons does this season. I still think he's a big name who you want to have on your IDP leagues if you're playing in those. Mincah Parsons, number 15, a top 15 pick for IDP. Love him. Love the season that he's going to have this season.
Okay. I gave us a little
That was
extra
weird.
pause. Yep. Well, I gave us a pause in between because that's the end. So with